The Boeing 777 was falling from the sky. Both engines dead. 189 passengers screaming. 3 minutes until they hit the ocean. But one woman in seat 14C calmly stood up and walked toward the cockpit. Before you read this story, tell me which country you're from. Comment below. Subscribe now because I'm posting an even better story tomorrow. The plane was falling from the sky. Everyone was going to die in 3 minutes. But the woman in seat 14C just closed her book and stood up like she was leaving a coffee shop. First Officer Jake Martinez was screaming into the radio. Both engines were dead. Captain Sarah Woods was slumped over the controls with blood on her face. All 189 passengers were crying and praying. The Boeing 777 was dropping like a stone through clouds over the Pacific Ocean. But nobody noticed the quiet woman with brown hair walking calmly toward the cockpit. Oxygen masks swung wildly around her head. Luggage flew through the cabin like missiles. She just kept walking. Her name was Emma Carter. She looked like a teacher or maybe someone who worked in an office. She wore jeans and a gray sweater with comfortable shoes. She was 36 years old with tired eyes and no makeup. She carried a paperback book about cooking. When she boarded the flight from Tokyo to San Francisco 6 hours earlier, nobody gave her a second look. The businessman next to her asked what she did for work. She said something boring about consulting. He lost interest immediately. Nobody on that plane knew that Emma Carter had a call sign that made F-22 pilots stand straighter when they heard it. Nobody knew she had flown more combat missions than almost anyone alive. Nobody knew she had shot down enemy aircraft while doing maneuvers that broke every rule in the book. She had left the Air Force 9 months ago after 18 years of service. She chose this invisible life on purpose. She was tired of people treating her like she was different from normal human beings. The plane had been flying normally at 38,000 feet over the Pacific when Emma felt something wrong. A vibration that most passengers wouldn't notice. But it made her fingers tighten on her book. Then the captain's voice came over the speaker. She was trying to sound calm. But Emma heard the fear underneath. The captain said they were having technical problems. They needed to go to a lower altitude. 30 seconds later, both engines exploded. Not a Hollywood fireball. A rapid failure where metal pieces tore through the engines. Fuel lines broke. Control systems failed. The plane jerked violently to the left. Then it dropped. That sickening feeling when your stomach lifts up. Passengers lifted against their seatbelts. Oxygen masks fell from above. Emergency lights flashed red. Emma had her mask on before anyone else. Her combat training made her move without thinking. The businessman next to her was praying with his eyes closed. His hands shook too hard to put his mask on. Emma reached over and fixed it for him. She pressed it tight against his face. She told him to breathe slow and deep. The plane was still falling. Emma knew they had maybe 3 minutes before they hit the ocean. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. She gripped the seats to keep from falling. The aircraft shook and dropped. A flight attendant yelled at her to sit down. Emma ignored her. She started moving toward the cockpit. She pulled herself forward hand over hand. The cabin tilted at a crazy angle. She reached the cockpit door and looked inside. Captain Sarah Woods was unconscious. Blood ran down her face. First Officer Jake Martinez was in the right seat. He was 24 years old. This was his first year flying big planes. His hands were frozen on the controls. Sweat poured down his face. Emma stepped into the cockpit. She put her hand on Jake's shoulder. She spoke in a voice that cut through his panic. "My name is Emma Carter. Call sign Phoenix. Retired Air Force fighter pilot. 4,000 hours in tactical aircraft. I'm taking command right now." Jake stared at her with wild eyes. Emma grabbed his shoulder harder. "Listen to me. I need a systems report. Quick and clean. Tell me everything that's broken." Jake stammered. "Both engines failed. We lost 2 hydraulic systems. The third is failing. We're in an unpowered descent with almost no flight control." Emma looked at the instruments. They were falling through 26,000 feet at 4,000 feet per minute. That gave them exactly 6.5 minutes until they hit the ocean. "Get the captain out of that seat," Emma said. "Strap her into the jump seat. Then get back here." Jake started pulling the unconscious captain backward. Emma slid into the left seat. She felt the controls in her hands. They felt mushy and weak because of the hydraulic failures. But there was still some control left if she used them exactly right. Jake got back into the right seat. Emma told him to stop sending mayday calls. Air traffic control couldn't help them now. "How many flight hours do you have?" Emma asked. 3,000 total. 600 in the 777. "That's good enough. You're my co-pilot now. Do exactly what I say. No questions. Jake nodded. Emma saw his hands steady a little. Someone had taken command. They were passing through 22,000 feet. Emma pulled back on the controls. She was trading altitude for airspeed in a careful balance. The rate of fall decreased from 4,000 feet per minute to 3,000. Activate the ram air turbine, Emma said. Now. The ram air turbine was an emergency system. It would drop a small turbine into the air to generate some electrical power. Jake activated it. Some of the red warning lights changed to amber. Minimal power returned to critical systems. Pull up the fuel display, Emma said. Jake showed her the screen. Both wings still had thousands of gallons of jet fuel, even though the engines were dead. Emma stared at that fuel reading. An idea formed in her mind. An insane idea that violated every commercial aviation rule ever written. But she had done something similar once in an F-16 when her engine failed over enemy territory. Do you know how to manually dump fuel? Emma asked. Yes, but why would we? Shut up and listen. This plane is a glider now. A terrible glider. But if we dump fuel in a specific way, we can create an imbalance that will force the plane to turn without using the engines. We can use gravity and momentum to point the nose west, back toward the islands. Jake looked at her like she was crazy. That won't work. I've done the math in my head. We have enough altitude to glide 160 miles if I manage our energy perfectly. There's an island called Midway with a runway long enough for a 777. It's exactly 155 miles to the west. That's impossible. Start dumping fuel from the right wing tanks. Maximum flow. Do it now. Jake hesitated. Emma snapped at him in a voice that sounded like a fighter pilot in combat. He activated the dump valves. Fuel started streaming from the right wing. Emma felt the plane respond as the weight changed. She used the remaining hydraulic pressure to bank the aircraft right. The nose started to swing around. The plane was turning, but still falling. They dropped through 16,000 feet. Stop the fuel dump, Emma said. Now dump from the left wing. The weight shifted again. Emma used the momentum to steepen the turn. She brought the nose around until they pointed west. She leveled the wings and looked at the instruments. They were at 14,000 feet with a fall rate of 2,000 feet per minute. Jake calculated their glide ratio. We can glide about 145 miles. We'll fall into the ocean 10 miles short of Midway. 10 miles is nothing, Emma said. Look at the wing configuration. What are the flaps at? Retracted. If we extend the flaps just 5 degrees, we can change the wing's lift. Reduce our sink rate without creating too much drag. Extend flaps to 5 degrees. Jake looked terrified, but he reached for the flap lever. The flaps started extending. Emma felt the aircraft shudder. The fall rate decreased from 2,000 feet per minute to 1,500. Jake ran the numbers again. We can now glide 162 miles. We'll still fall short by 3 miles. What's the weather at Midway? He checked. Winds from the east at 12 knots. Tailwind. That gives us maybe 2 extra miles. We're still 1 mile short. Then Emma remembered something from her fighter pilot training. A technique that stunt pilots used. Watch what I do, she said. She pushed the controls forward. Let the nose drop. Trading altitude for airspeed. When they hit 280 knots, she pulled back hard. She converted that airspeed back into altitude in a smooth arc. They climbed 400 feet before the speed bled off. It was called a porpoising maneuver. It was dangerous in a commercial aircraft. But Emma had just bought them 400 feet of extra altitude. That translated to maybe 2 more miles of glide distance. We're going to do that again and again, Emma said. Porpoising across the sky. Trading speed for altitude and altitude for distance. Until we reach Midway or run out of air. They porpoised down through 10,000 feet. Through 8,000. Through 6,000. Through 4,000. Jake checked their position. Midway is 50 miles ahead. We're going to make it. But making it to Midway was only half the problem. They still had to land a plane with no engines. They were at 3,000 feet. Midway was 20 miles ahead. Close enough that Emma could see it through the windscreen. Extend the landing gear, Emma said. Jake looked at her like she was insane. That'll create massive drag. That's exactly what I want. Do it. Jake extended the landing gear. The plane shuddered as the wheels lowered. The drag was enormous. They dropped from 3,000 feet to 1,500 feet in less than a minute. Extend flaps to 30 degrees, Emma said. Jake did it. The nose pitched down hard. They were at 800 feet altitude. The runway was right in front of them. Emma leveled the wings and aimed for the start of the runway. She was high and fast. She had no engines to correct with, so she did something that would get her failed in any flight school. She entered a forward slip. She crossed the controls to make the aircraft fly sideways through the air. The fuselage presented to the wind like an air brake. The plane was falling at 3,000 feet per minute, shaking so hard that Jake was gripping his armrests and praying. Emma held the slip until they were 300 feet above the ground, lined up with the runway. Then she kicked the rudder and leveled the wings. They crossed the runway threshold at 150 feet. Too high. Too fast. The wheels touched down hard. The tires screamed as they hit concrete at 180 knots. Emma stood on the brakes. Deploy the speed brakes. They were rolling down the runway at 140 knots. Then 120. Then 100. Emma could see the end of the runway coming up fast. 80 knots. 60 knots. 40 knots. The runway end was 400 feet away. Then 200. Then 100. The aircraft rolled to a complete stop with 40 feet of concrete remaining between them and the water. Emma sat back in the seat. She took her first full breath in what felt like an hour. Jake was crying. Tears ran down his face while he laughed and cried at the same time. He reached over and grabbed Emma's hand. She squeezed back. You did good work. Emergency vehicles surrounded the plane. Emma told Jake to evacuate the passengers. She helped the flight attendants deploy the emergency slides. She guided people toward the exits. The passengers evacuated quickly. Emma was about to slide down herself when she heard something that made her freeze. A radio transmission coming through the cockpit speakers. A voice on the military emergency frequency. The distinctive tone of an F-22 Raptor pilot. Phoenix, this is Falcon 21. We've been monitoring your situation. We observed your approach and landing. Requesting confirmation of your identity. Emma stood frozen. She didn't understand how F-22 pilots knew her call sign. Then she remembered. The military tracked all aircraft emergencies. Someone had looked up the passenger manifest. She walked back to the cockpit. She picked up the radio microphone. Falcon 21, this is Phoenix. Identity confirmed. All passengers and crew are safe. There was silence for a few seconds. Then another voice came on. Phoenix, this is Falcon 22. We just wanted to say it's an honor to share the sky with you. What you just did was impossible. You made it look easy. A third voice came on. This one had the gravelly tone of a senior pilot. Phoenix, this is Falcon 20. We've all heard the stories about you. The missions you flew. The people you saved. We just watched you save 189 more. We wanted you to know that your call sign still means something up here. It means never giving up even when the situation is hopeless. Emma pressed the transmit button. Her voice was rougher than she wanted. Falcon 20, thank you. That means more than you know. Phoenix out. She hung up the microphone. She turned around to find Jake standing in the cockpit doorway, staring at her. Were those really F-22 pilots talking about your call sign? Jake asked. Who exactly are you? Emma realized there was no point in hiding anymore. My call sign is Phoenix. I earned it during my 4th combat deployment when I shot down 3 enemy aircraft in a single mission while protecting a rescue helicopter. I flew F-16s for 10 years. Then I transitioned to F-22s. I eventually commanded a fighter squadron. I logged over 600 combat hours. I was awarded the Silver Star. When they told me I was too valuable to risk in combat anymore, I retired. Why aren't you still in the cockpit where you belong? I was tired of war. Tired of watching friends die. I wanted to grow a garden and read books and be anonymous. But apparently the universe had other plans. The passengers were gathering on the runway. Someone had told them that the woman who saved them was a decorated fighter pilot. Emma climbed down the emergency slide. She tried to blend into the crowd. But Jake came down behind her. He announced to everyone that this was the woman who saved them. This was Phoenix. This was a legend. The passengers turned toward her. For a moment there was silence. Then someone started clapping. Someone else joined in. Within seconds all 189 passengers and crew members were applauding. The businessman from seat 14B pushed through the crowd. He grabbed her shoulders. I have 2 daughters at home, he said. I'm supposed to walk my oldest daughter down the aisle at her wedding next month. Because of you, I'm going to be there. Emma walked away from the crowd. She stood at the edge of the runway looking out at the ocean. She heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see a young Air Force officer approaching. He wore a flight suit with F-22 squadron patches. He saluted her. My name is Captain David Chin. Call sign Falcon 21. I was on patrol when I heard the emergency calls. When we confirmed your identity through the passenger manifest, every F-22 pilot in the air switched to the emergency frequency to listen. Back at Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii, pilots are gathering to watch the news coverage. Your name is being spoken with reverence. Why does it matter so much to them? Emma asked. Why does my call sign still carry weight when I've been retired for 9 months? Call signs like Phoenix aren't just names, Captain Chin said. They're standards that other pilots measure themselves against. When training gets hard and missions seem impossible, instructors tell us about Phoenix. About the fighter pilot who never gave up. Your legacy isn't in the past. It's in every pilot who pushes themselves harder because they want to be worthy of flying in the same sky that you flew in. Emma listened to this. She felt something shift inside her. She had thought she could leave the military and leave behind the weight of being someone that other people looked up to. But Captain Chin was showing her that legacy was not something you could retire from. What happens now? She asked. That's up to you. But the Air Force would welcome you back in any capacity you choose. Emma thought about that offer. About the garden she had planned to plant. The quiet life she had thought she wanted. She realized that maybe she had been wrong about what would make her happy. Maybe happiness was not found in escaping responsibility, but in accepting it. I'll think about it, she said. I'll consider coming back in some role that lets me train the next generation of pilots. The sun was setting over Midway Atoll. Emma sat on the runway with her back against one of the landing gear tires. She watched the sunset, feeling the warmth of being alive. Jake sat down next to her. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Finally Jake said, When I woke up this morning in Tokyo, I was thinking about my career. Wondering if I would ever be more than just an average pilot. Now I've helped save 189 lives alongside a living legend. You didn't just help, Emma said. You were essential. Being a good pilot isn't about flying perfect approaches in perfect weather. It's about keeping your head when everything goes wrong. Finding solutions when the rulebook says there are no solutions left. As night fell over Midway, someone started a fire near the runway. The passengers gathered around it. Someone had found a guitar and was playing soft music. People were sharing food and telling stories. Emma sat at the edge of the group watching them. She understood that this was what made flying worth all the risk and fear and responsibility. These moments when you looked at people who were alive because of choices you made. She stood up. She walked toward the damaged 777 sitting at the end of the runway. Its engines destroyed but its fuselage intact. Every passenger seat empty because everyone had walked away alive. She put her hand on the landing gear. Felt the metal still warm from the friction of the landing. She made a decision. She would go back to the Air Force in whatever capacity they wanted her. She would train pilots and share her knowledge. She would accept that being Phoenix was not just a call sign from her past. It was who she was. Who she would always be. The next morning, a fleet of Coast Guard and Air Force transport aircraft arrived to evacuate the passengers to Hawaii. Emma tried to avoid the cameras. But the passengers insisted that she be recognized. Eventually she agreed to one press conference. She stood next to Jake and answered questions. The reporters asked how she stayed calm when everyone was panicking. Panic is a choice, she said. I chose not to make it because panic kills people. They asked how she learned to fly a commercial aircraft without engines. I learned by spending 18 years in situations where the rulebook didn't apply. Survival required creativity and skill and a refusal to give up. The press conference ended. Emma walked toward the C-130 that would take her to Hawaii. As she climbed the ramp, she heard jet engines overhead. She looked up to see 4 F-22 Raptors flying in perfect formation above the island. They were flying a missing man formation. The aerial salute that fighter pilots used to honor fallen comrades. Except this time they were honoring someone who was very much alive. The 4 jets flew across the island in tight formation. Then one of them broke away and climbed toward the sky, leaving a gap that represented the honored pilot. Emma stood at the top of the ramp with tears running down her face. The F-22s completed their salute. Then they came back around for one more pass. As they passed overhead, she heard their voices on her handheld radio. One by one each F-22 pilot spoke her call sign over the radio. Just that one word. Phoenix. Spoken with respect and pride and brotherhood. Emma raised her hand in salute to them. The 4 F-22s climbed back into the sky and disappeared into the clouds. Emma lowered her hand and walked into the C-130. She found a seat near the window. She looked out at Midway Atoll growing smaller below her. At the runway where she had landed a dead aircraft and saved 189 lives. When the C-130 landed at Hickam Air Force Base, there was a crowd waiting on the tarmac. Hundreds of aviators standing at attention to welcome her home. The wing commander was at the front of the formation. When Emma walked down the ramp, he saluted her. She returned the salute. "The Air Force is honored to have you back," he said. "Your office is ready. Your first class of students is waiting." Emma looked at the assembled pilots. She saw young faces and old faces. Fighter pilots and transport pilots and helicopter pilots. She understood that she was looking at her family. She had tried to leave this family and live as a civilian. But today had shown her that you couldn't leave family. "I'm ready to start immediately," she said. That evening, Emma stood in her new office at Hickam. She looked at the walls already decorated with photos of F-22s and F-16s. Aircraft she had flown and loved. There was a plaque on the desk with her call sign engraved on it. She sat down and pulled out a notepad. She started writing her curriculum for the first class of students she would train. She wrote about decision-making under pressure. About using every resource available even when the situation seemed hopeless. She wrote about the responsibility of holding people's lives in your hands. About understanding that every decision you made in the cockpit rippled outward to affect families and communities and futures. She wrote about technical skills and tactical maneuvers. But mostly she wrote about mindset and attitude and the refusal to accept defeat. Captain Chin knocked on her door. "The investigation into the flight is already underway," he said. "Early findings suggest that the dual-engine failure was caused by a manufacturing defect. It affects multiple aircraft in the fleet. Your emergency landing has potentially saved hundreds of other lives by identifying the problem before more aircraft failed. Boeing is grounding similar aircraft for emergency inspections." He told her one more thing. "The story of your flight has spread beyond military aviation. Commercial pilots around the world are studying what you did. Airlines are updating their emergency procedures based on the techniques you used. Your one landing has potentially changed commercial aviation safety forever." The sun set over Hickam Air Force Base. Emma stood at her window watching F-22s taking off for evening training missions. She thought about the businessman who would walk his daughter down the aisle. About the grandmother who would hold her grandchild. About the young couple who would build a life together. About all the futures that existed because she refused to let an aircraft fall from the sky. The last F-22 of the evening took off and climbed toward the stars. Emma watched it until it disappeared into the darkness. She turned away from the window. She looked at her desk covered with lesson plans and training schedules. She smiled because she knew exactly who she was and exactly what she was meant to do. She was Phoenix. And tomorrow she would begin training the next generation of pilots. Pilots who would carry that same commitment to excellence. That same refusal to let people die when there was any chance that skill and determination could save them. She was home. Not in a place, but in a purpose. And she would never run from that purpose again. Jake appeared in her doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her without saying anything. They stood together looking out at the airfield. "What are you going to do next?" Emma asked. "I've already submitted my application to transfer to the Air Force," Jake said. "I listed you as my preferred instructor." Emma nodded. "I'll accept you into my program. But you need to understand that I'll be harder on you than anyone else. Because I know what you're capable of." Jake smiled. "I wouldn't want it any other way." They stood in silence for a moment. "Before today I thought being a hero meant doing something extraordinary that nobody else could do," Jake said. "But now I understand that being a hero means doing what needs to be done even when it's terrifying. Even when it seems impossible. You showed me that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway." The base was quiet now. Emma told Jake to go home and get some rest. Jake headed for the door. But he stopped and turned back. "Thank you," he said. "For everything. Stop thanking me and start preparing. When you show up for training, I'm going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed." Emma sat back down at her desk. She continued writing her curriculum. Thinking about all the pilots who would sit in her classroom and learn from her. She thought about the ripple effect of her work. How teaching one pilot could save hundreds of lives over the course of a career. She finished her curriculum at midnight. She leaned back in her chair. She had saved 189 lives today. But more importantly, she had remembered who she was. Why she had become a pilot in the first place. She had become a pilot because she wanted to protect people. Because she wanted to master a skill that few people ever mastered. Emma stood up and walked to the window one last time. She looked out at the darkened airfield where F-22s sat waiting for tomorrow's missions. She put her hand on the glass. She made a promise to herself and to every pilot who would train under her. She promised that she would never let another pilot face an impossible situation unprepared, that she would share everything she knew and demand excellence in return. She smiled and turned away from the window. She picked up her curriculum and her coffee cup. She walked out of her office ready to begin the next chapter of her life. She was Phoenix. She was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. And for the first time in 9 months she felt complete. Tomorrow she would stand in front of her first class of students. She would tell them the story of the flight. She would use that story to teach them about responsibility and courage and the refusal to accept defeat. She would tell them that being a pilot was the greatest privilege and the heaviest burden. And if they were not willing to accept both, they should leave now before they got someone killed. And when her students graduated and went on to fly their own missions, when they faced their own emergencies and made their own impossible decisions, they would carry with them the lessons of Phoenix, the legend who came out of retirement to save 189 lives, and then came back to make sure that future pilots could do the same. Emma walked out of the building into the warm Hawaiian night. She breathed in the smell of jet fuel and ocean salt. She felt at peace for the first time since she had retired. She had tried to run from her calling, tried to be someone she was not. But the universe had put her on that flight for a reason. She had been given a second chance to do what she did best, and she was not going to waste it. She was Phoenix, and her work was not done. It was just beginning.